Welcome back to our second episode of Education Contemplation. I am your host, Joshua Preza.
I'm Francis Bayona.
Juan Fernandez.
And I'm Gustavo Marino Martinez.
And we are joined today by our two guests.
I'm Mrs. Renan, 13-year veteran teacher in Perth Amboy School District, and former teacher of most of the students in this room except for one.
I'm Joelina Duarte. I'm a senior at Perth Amboy High School, and I've been in this district for my whole life.
And our topic today is sexism in the school. So sexism is a topic that may be considered difficult to talk about, which is why we have our experts. And I want to start with, I guess, my topic. So what I started with is the definition of sexism. And I tried to find something outside of just America and what they think, because kind of limited. So this said this was a international, a bunch of states, I think 43 countries agree on this definition. So it says, any act, gesture, visual representation, spoken or written words, practice, or behavior based upon the idea that a person or a group of persons is inferior because of their sex, which occurs in the public or private sphere, whether online or offline. So I think the big thing of this definition is for us to agree, for us to show that this definition is true, we'd have to admit a lot of things to ourselves that people may not want to admit, which is why I feel sexism, you don't really see it talked about in schools. I was looking at something and it said that 8 states here in the United States, were told, telling teachers to limit controversial subjects like race and sexism, which is kind of insane to me because these also weren't southern states where you'd expect it to be, but states like New Hampshire and stuff, states up in the north where you wouldn't really expect that kind of stuff. So it really shocked me. So.
That's honestly really interesting because I was honestly just not expecting that. But overall, and it's kind of hard for me to talk about this because obviously, it's different from women and men.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't say me personally. I've gone through a lot of moments where I myself can see it. But just from times where I've definitely heard about those type of experiences. Again, that's why we have the experts here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not really good at this type of topic. I can't say I had many personal experience I can really talk about.
Well, can I jump in?
Of course.
Gentlemen. So I think, obviously I want to acknowledge as we go into this conversation, the power dynamics in the room. I'm obviously much older than you, not by that much, but a little bit older than you. I am a former teacher and I have a different role in the school than you do. So my perspective is going to be a little bit different than your perspective, right? But I was a student in the past, so I obviously have that going for me. And I, could speak about those experiences. But I think what's actually interesting that you guys are bringing up is we actually had a meeting today, and I'm on a committee in this school, which I don't know if you actually know exists, which is also maybe part of the problem, but it's called Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity. And there is a committee and there is an initiative in this building and across the district to address this issue and others, of course, right, that are related to diversity, inclusion, and equity. And I think the things that come out of this conversation today will be valuable for me to even bring back to the group. So I think that, some of the things that we talk about in that conversation is always thinking, when we're having these very frank conversations, it can be kind of uncomfortable, right? And we can be experiencing discomfort, or we might be questioning our own experiences and thoughts. And I think no matter what we talk about today, we should really assume that we have positive intent and we're not here to harm one another, and we just want to kind of get to the bottom of these issues, that we be more inclusive and we address these, inequities that we may see. So I think just coming in as, your former teacher and friend, the more frank and the more honest we can be about our experiences, the better. So I'm just interested in hearing, as students, have you had any experiences related to sexism, or have you witnessed or heard about things that maybe your classmates have experienced, just to kind of go there?
I like bringing it here home, obviously, Perth Amboy, and honestly, I do find it kind of good about this, about this district compared to many other districts. Even back from where I came from in New York, this school actually does tries to keep equality like between the sexes pretty well. Like they actually do have a lot of I mean, you would obviously know better than me, like the rules and like the punishments and stuff like that. But I kind of feel like they actually keep order here when it comes to sexism pretty decently compared to other schools. I'm not saying they had to do a perfect job. Again, you know better than me. You're obviously the teacher here. You're the veteran. But for example, like where I came from in New York, my sister used to be a freshman. She would get dress coded constantly. The main thing would obviously be the dress code. Obviously, that's like the first thing that comes to mind when I talk about this. She would be dress coded constantly, even when she wouldn't wear anything, like even just shoulders alone. Like we kind of touched about the dress code a bit. Like to be fair, I'm pretty confident I can come into a tank top in this school pretty easily, compared to a lot of like girls. That's the main thing I want to say. But again, like just repeating my point, I honestly do feel like Perth Amboy does a pretty good job when it comes to the topic of sexism.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely seen like the stuff we do does like encourage, and obviously in other aspects as well. But Mr. Nod, have you seen personally any like?
I mean, obviously, I think you guys know me now, that my goal, and I don't do it perfectly, is to be the most inclusive that I can be. But there's times where I have to check myself, right? We all have unconscious biases, whether we know them or not, or maybe we are aware of things that we do. I feel like, something that I'll come out and say is that, and this is also me being 9 years in the middle school, so think back to how you all were in middle school. I think, there were times where maybe I was a bit more punitive with the males than maybe the females, especially when it came to middle school. When I say punitive, like a little bit harsher, maybe called them out a little bit more on their behavior than I would maybe with females. And that's not something that I was doing consciously, but at the middle school age, and like, the boys kind of getting together and like roughhousing or pushing or doing, all that stuff that would annoy a middle school teacher when you're trying to teach, I think would definitely, I could see myself now and I'm conscious of that, and it would be something that I would say like I would get work on. But sometimes you're in the moment and you're just trying to handle your business, right? And I think that's something I would be interested, I don't have the data on this, but I'd be interested to look at, even here at the high school, what the write-up situation or the behavior referrals are when you compare the two sexes. I would be interested, and we don't have access to that. I may be a veteran, but I don't have access to all that inside stuff. But I think it would be interesting to look at that data to see, even at the high school, what the behavior referrals are, whether it's dress code or cutting class or interrupting classroom instruction, how that would compare when it came to the sexes. That's something that I could think of. It could be based on the teacher, but I think also school-wide would be interesting to look at that data point. But yeah, I think middle school was a little bit rougher for me. I don't see it so much here that in my behavior. But I can see sometimes certain, staff members, whether they know it or not, maybe treat, boys different than girls, males versus than females, whether, they know it or not. And they might not be doing it to intentionally cause harm, right? They might just be trying to get through their day, but that's something that they might have to check. So I don't, that's kind of something I would think of behavior. I know dress code comes up a lot. When it gets warmer, definitely, that becomes an issue.
No, honestly, I like the point that you gave about how I wish we could have the data on the write-up situation. Because that would be very interesting to see. Because from my point of view, a lot of guys do get written up, but a lot of guys I see getting written up are just simply getting written up for like cutting class and stuff. But I would, and you also brought up the point perfectly about how we have just biases where we can't really control that. Like me personally, like if I was a teacher, I could definitely see myself, even me without even thinking of consciously, I would definitely treat the girls different from the guys. Just kind of how you said. Like honestly, me just being a guy myself, I would probably be more lenient towards the guys than towards the girls.
And I think like my computer died, so I don't have my stuff up. So we'd have to really talk about statistics, but I think you guys even had some things up about dropout rates, right, are higher for males than females. And that changes obviously and evolves through the years, but we see more, females are now more college educated, getting higher, more advanced degrees than males, decades ago. And why is that? Those are some of the things to think about. Is it what's happening in the actual schools? Is it happening something, societal on a societal level? Those are things to discuss, but I think starting with student experiences really and kind of going, micro and then going macro is something that is worth looking into.
I mean,
Jolene, as
Wait, because also about the fact that females have to, because for me in my experience personally, I feel like it's but it's kind of more accepted for males to kind of lack off in school because they can get into, let's say, like physical jobs, like more of like labor-wise and like business, but like your own type of, like growing your own kind of business. And women, it's more like, well, there's nothing else for you to do if you're not really getting an education.
Okay.
And your job, and like how you were telling me earlier, where women tend to more go into like jobs like nursing or like teaching, like those type of jobs that don't really.
So are you talking about like manual labor basically? Like you
Yeah.
feel that guys basically have more options and you feel kind of how like women, their main option is basically a field in which you have to actually get a degree for.
Yeah.
Like how you said.
And
nursing.
there's a notion out there that nursing, social work, teaching, education tend to be what many people are calling pink collar. So there's white collar jobs, right, that have to do with corporations and business, and then blue collar jobs, which is I think you're talking about as the more hands-on, labor intensive jobs. And now pink collar is referring to those care oriented jobs like social work and education and nursing that now you see more males entering, like say the nursing profession. But if you look at if you look at elementary age, middle school, they still tend to be dominated by women. At the high school level, you'll see more males as teachers, but that's because, that tends to be more of a content focus, whereas when elementary school, I mean, you guys probably have siblings, right? Elementary school's hands-on, like middle school's hands-on. And I think women tend to go into those care-oriented positions, and I think that's kind of where you're going with, is that you need degrees also, which costs money and so you have to perform to get those degrees, and then you go into these jobs where you're also caring for others, and maybe also you could look at the wage gap, even in those jobs comparatively to some blue collar or white collar positions.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I could speak a little bit because I am a male trying to enter the education profession.
Yay!
A
So
history
proud.
teacher?
Yes,
Yeah.
a history
Oh, that
teacher.
makes a
He
lot
got a
of
5
sense.
on
Yeah,
his
okay.
For the record, 5 on the
record.
AP World Test.
On the AP World History exam, the only one in the school last year.
I mean, I don't blame him, but since he got that
But I was a
5,
teacher, so we gotta.
Yeah, I think I've heard it like at least once a week, at the bare minimum once a week.
I love it. I love
Yeah,
it, and I
but-
encourage it.
But yeah, I mean, because I want to teach high school, and it's generally for the reasons that, like, it's not so related, but it's also part of it. Like, I feel like a part of me would be uncomfortable or would be, like, unable to, say, work with smaller children in those, like, earlier positions, because especially, like, societally, men who tend to work with little kids, especially girls, are not seen well. They're seen as, like, creeps or something, which, like, I was looking through some, like, personal anecdotes from some guys who do work in that, like, a field, and they're like, I can't dress code kids, I can't dress code female kids because you'll be seen as, like, objectifying them, or you can't, like, it was a preschool teacher, he was like, I can't help kids to the bathroom because that's, like, too much, like, I have to get a female teacher over, and just stuff like that, like, it would push me away from trying to work in those younger ages, but, I mean, even in the high school level, there's a certain level of care you need to have as a male teacher, not to be seen, like, in a bad way, like, especially when talking to the opposite sex, which I feel like could really influence how they end up talking to them.
So in a way that might even be going back to we're jumping around, right? But this all has to do with, but it goes back to even maybe making connections as to behavior referrals, right? Maybe male teachers are less likely to write up female students, right, for certain things that they would write up a male student for because it might be seen a certain way, right? Or they just don't want that extra attention. I mean, I don't know what the data is on that, but it could be a possible connection as well. But yeah, I think a lot of that has to do with, what we focus on you guys are at the point of making big decisions about your life, right? So your experiences in education are going to shape what you do next. And so, how you feel about the world comes from kind of this little microcosm of the world here at Perth Amboy. So,
And
I don't know, you,
well, basically, I was gonna go further into a bit of my topic, which is obviously sexism as a taboo topic in schools. And a part that I saw, which genuinely gets me mad, is definitely the lack of education on female menstruation. Because when you really think about it, half the population does it. Like literally, 4 billion people on this earth go through menstruation. We have, as a student, I think we've maybe had one health class on it. That's it. And then there's obviously stuff like the school doesn't provide menstrual products and stuff like that, which are like bare necessities. I know it's kind of based on like a teacher's individual. I know Miss Soderholm did it because Miss Soderholm is one of the best.
the goat,
So
one of the goats.
yeah, like like it's really up to the teachers, like the teacher's own pocket to do that, which is ridiculous. Like students should be learning about, say, the effects of menstruation physically, mentally, and I feel like we're kind of failing as an education system to do that, because it's not just important for girls to know what's going on for their own body, but for guys when they get into like relationships with females and like just like like on a day-to-day basis interacting with them, they should know that type of stuff. It's basic human anatomy that we're not being taught because it's seen as gross or not being like talked about. And like I feel like the worst part is the people who decided that something like menstruation was gross was men. We kind of decided, oh, it's gross, let's not talk about it, and only to the detriment of women.
Yeah, you can, I think at the end, I know they've revamped some of the health and physical education standards. I'm not well versed in them, but I know that you guys got new letters and stuff this year about warning parents that new standards were going to be discussed. I don't know what they were, but maybe it had to do with something like that, in that I think it becomes so taboo, right? Because unfortunately, sex has become so political, right? There's so much tied to that, even though it is human anatomy and all of that. There's so much politics around what should be taught, how it should be taught. If we don't talk about it, kids won't do it. And there's a lot of data that we could pull up about, the success of talking about it actually lowers teenage pregnancy. Talking about it, learning about it, knowing all of those things makes people feel more comfortable, and then maybe going to a trusted teacher or, educator would also help in that.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because I actually did a project on that for Mr. Kleckner, and it was basically that, because like it's kind of up to the state to fund giving menstrual products in the bathrooms, and ours doesn't, obviously. And there's like a really good website. It's called Period, and they do like a lot of collaborations with like menstruation kind of companies, like things that kind of like how do you say, like advocate for that.
Yeah, advocate.
And it is a really good point, and I feel like it is still like, I know that we've kind of moved on where I feel like we're more comfortable to talk about certain things now, but I feel like there's still certain people that get kind of like icky talking about it.
Yeah.
And it definitely, like for me, like I could talk with my friends or with my teachers, with my female teachers about it. And sometimes in some, when you talk about some students, it's kind of like that's something you keep to yourself,
Yeah, because as a male, like for a long time in my life, I thought girls on her period, she was just mad and moody, and that's really about it, and she was in pain. Like I knew nothing. I was based off like media and stuff. Like that's no way that I should be learning, because it's just like we're in school, we're supposed to learn about these types of things. Like we're supposed to learn, get ready for life. And if we don't even know what happens with half the population during a certain time of the month, like how are we supposed to go out and like, call ourselves fully educated?
Yeah, I even remember health class freshman year. I didn't even know what a menstrual cycle was. That was like the year I learned. And when my class
I'm
figured
just
out,
trying to picture you as a
didn't learn
freshman.
until we got it.
when my female classmates, like, because I think my health teacher asked me, Francis, what's a menstrual cycle? And I was like so confused, and then all my female classmates were like so shocked because I didn't know what a menstrual cycle was.
So
I think it's really.
I
Yeah.
honestly feel like the only way you would even learn that at a near young age is if you grew up
in a
with
household
female.
with-
It
Yeah.
truly
That's-
is.
That's the only reason I even found out about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you might not even know it's called a menstrual cycle
Yeah.
because
Oh,
no
no,
one's
I didn't
walking
know
around
that.
saying like,
Nobody
this
calls
is my
it-
menstruation.
I'm in
They're
my
saying,
menstrual.
It took like a single word for me to learn what it was.
Yeah.
Period.
And
No,
menstruation is not
interesting.
actually the period. It's
No, right.
the
Yes.
process.
It's the
That's
actual
fine.
cycle.
And
Now we're
it's
getting
true,
to the
people
nit.
do downplay the pain that it actually, because it, like for example, I have friends that actually like go through like throwing up in period days, and it's like it's just, it's really not just a little bit of pain. Like it hits everybody differently, but it's something that it's like it really sucks the life out of you, and it's.
Well, it is, yeah, literally.
It is, and
But I
it's
think
not-
that's also
yeah.
something teachers, right? Like sometimes don't even think about. Again, if we're thinking like micro, might not think about that, right? When a student is asking to use the restroom, and like it's not the right time or it's not the best time, but
Or
like
don't bring your book back. with
right,
you.
or don't bring your book bag with you. That happens all the time. I see with and I get it because this idea that like. There's other things happening, but that's not, I always err on the side of trusting a student and, until they show me otherwise.
Yeah.
And I would never be like, oh no, don't bring your bag with you. Because one, that's, like, you're young adults. Like, that's just,
Yeah, but in middle school that was a big thing. Like, why are you bringing your bag in?
Yeah.
You're
You
like,
would just have to
pretty
be like,
obvious.
in front of the whole
and
class.
that's
and it would just
embarrassing
be like, yeah,
because it
really
goes back
was.
to that it's such a taboo
Yeah.
topic. If it was talked about, I remember, and this is old school, like 5th grade, we did have a talk
Yeah,
about
you remember
it.
5th grade?
I remember 5th grade,
That's
Jolena.
crazy.
I'm not that old. But 5th grade, I remember, and it was because all the other older kids would tell you like the talk was coming. But it was like, I think going back to it was one time where they took us out of gym, talked to us about it for 5 seconds, and then it was like, we did our duties.
The fact that they still do that. Well, I don't know about
I think
to
it's probably
this
5th
day,
grade, right?
But for me, it was 4th and 5th grade. Even back when I was in 4th and 5th
Okay,
grade.
stop saying back in the day.
Okay, okay. But
Well,
like,
it was back
like,
in the
it
day
was
for
like, what, like
him.
2013,
I don't remember 5th
2014?
grade.
2014.
You're pretty young.
That
years
was
ago,
so old
Oh, I thought you were
ago.
referring to me back in the day. Which is
No, like half of my class was basically saying like literally what you said. The talk is coming.
Yeah.
Oh,
Because
yeah.
they would separate us half.
And think
an
how
hour.
many
my God,
decades
they
are in between my
would.
education and the fact that that hasn't.
It still hasn't
evolved.
changed. Exactly.
That's-
It's-
Yeah.
That's a little scary.
insane.
And like it's just a concept of like, oh, we can't teach a kid about the menstrual cycle at like 4th grade because they're too young. But it's like, why would you want that to be a surprise? Like first of all,
Right.
like it's like
Yeah.
you need to
That's
know what that
traumatic
stuff is.
for a child,
Definitely.
and there are children, not to, but there are children, especially now, and this can, some people say, I don't know why, evolution, like there's a lot of different reasons that are getting their
Period
period
sooner.
much earlier.
Yeah.
So imagine you are in 5th grade, you haven't had the talk, and your parents haven't had it with you, which you'd hope they would, but
They
and then
probably
that
would.
happens to you in school, and you got no idea. And then, imagine the boys, not to say it's just going to be the boys, but it probably could be the girls too, then being like,
But also,
and that makes you
when
feel like an outcast.
when you don't talk about it, that opens up the floor for
Misinformation.
misinformation. Because I feel like my parents didn't really talk about those type of things. It was just kind of something that was gonna happen, and you were just gonna deal with it. And it was kind of like every information that I like searched, it was like in my friends. So like if I wanted to know something, I would ask my friends, and then they would learn something from somebody else, some random person, and then when I was taught otherwise, I was like, oh, like.
I feel like that's one of the few pluses to the whole internet era thing.
Yeah.
Because I feel like what you just described happening a lot more before everyone just had computers in their pockets.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Not-
for real had to learn on my. There were no computers.
Like I
and
feel
didn't
like
even know.
nowadays, obviously, it still happens as like a surprise, not just a menstrual cycle, but basically anything. But the fact that now you have basically a supercomputer just in your pocket, almost 24/7, helps a lot. Because for some reason, a lot of parents, I personally don't understand it, and thankfully my parents weren't that way. But for some reason, a lot of parents. I don't know if you remember this, but in middle school, your parents had to sign a paper. I don't even think it was middle school. I'm pretty sure even back in freshman year, for health class, your
Yeah.
parents would have to sign a paper saying, like, can we talk about this?
Yeah.
Like,
Yep.
I find that so stupid. That
For the
that's even
freshman
a
thing we
paper.
had.
And then if they didn't sign it, then you had to go be like isolated.
Yeah,
or
you were
somewhere
isolated
else.
from the whole
So then that's
class.
also.
I mean, some people chose not
Though
to actually want
I
to be
am
there.
curious, Gustavo, how is the education like in AUL?
The entirety of high school, freshman to now senior year, they have not mentioned anything about
At all?
sexual education. Nothing.
At
Every
all?
time we have health, it's just like nutrition, exercise. I do remember vividly 7th grade. We had a presentation.
Oh my God, I remember that.
But
That was.
this is an AWOL
traumatizing.
because they have a middle school branch. But the thing is that
It was a lot of pictures.
they didn't go into like the menstrual cycle. They didn't talk about
No.
hormones. They straight up showed pictures of different STDs.
Oh my God,
And
yes.
they-
And they would show up
Yeah,
like the
that's true.
actual parts, like, this is gonna happen to you if you're not abstinent.
Uncensored.
Scare tactic.
I was
Yeah.
like, I hadn't had lunch that day. I was like literally like, I was like, I still
Just when I'm
remember
happy
that.
I'm not a phys ed or health
Oh,
teacher.
Yeah, they didn't talk
Oh.
about birth control, condoms, nothing. Just
They really
straight
don't talk about.
pictures.
Now that you guys are saying, I'm kind of reflecting. I'm just like, they really don't talk
They do
about
I
that
don't
much.
mention
That's
it.
interesting. I don't know why there's such a stigma around it. Like it's forbidden knowledge. Because I remember also in 4th grade in Willens, they had a presentation. They called it the talk, but they separated the boys and the girls.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and the
Mhm.
boys they learned about just like deodorant and how their body works.
Really?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
what you
that's
guys were
that's all we
learning?
learned about.
And
We-
the girls
Wow.
learned about the menstrual cycle.
And then you all ran out and bought a bunch of Axe.
Yeah, but the thing is that I distinctly remember
Oversprayed.
that they wanted us to keep it to ourselves, saying this isn't something you go about talking in the hallways.
I honestly don't remember my element, but I know that a
remember
lot of
that.
people that went to Willens, myself included.
Yeah, I believe in 5th grade, I forgot exactly why, but in 5th grade, in 6th grade they did. 5th grade they didn't separate the guys. Instead, they made us wear headphones.
They
while
really
we were in
did?
the classroom while they were just
That's
giving
kind
the
of
presentation to
embarrassing.
the girls.
Yeah.
That's so
And they were
embarrassing.
just
I think I
watching
remember
each
that.
other's
Oh my
faces.
god.
That is
I
so
don't know if it
extra.
mattered, but I had
Why?
algebras. And
That I'm not privy to.
yeah,
Why?
they couldn't separate the guys, so instead they made us wear headphones. And I remember one time I myself took off the headphones, and the teacher then has got mad at me. and just how you said, just the fact that they separated is just weird.
Yeah, there's such a stigma behind it. Like it's like really taboo. You can't show it to the children. I just feel like I feel like especially the education system, they treat it as if you're introducing the topic of sex and sexualization to children, and it's not right. But the thing is that they're children. These are people that are like 8, 10. They're
Yeah.
not gonna fully understand the implications of it, so it's fine if
Yeah.
you teach them early on.
Yeah, you're talking about like bodily functions versus.
Exactly. You can't compare an 8-year-old like boy to someone that's 16, 17 and like is actually learning how their body works. They're not gonna
Right.
interpret the information the same way.
I actually have a question real quick. How was the sex ed in freshman year? Because I'm gonna be completely honest, I skipped both times.
There
we were
wasn't
supposed to
any
go.
sex. There was only that
The
one
team
time
pep.
they invited us to Team
Yeah, the team
Pep.
pep. How was
Team
that?
Pep.
That was, bro, Condom Man.
They were big on abstinence, and they did talk about protection and
Yeah.
stuff. They talked about like
Condoms.
the effects of having. They had a whole skit about having like an unwanted pregnancy, or like even if you do get an abortion, it would still like it could mess up your relationship and stuff, and like you could
This
like
was
never
where
be the same.
this is in Teen Pep.
Team
Yeah.
Pep. Yeah, that was a Team Pep presentation.
This is what
That's
Team
all.
Pep teaches this year, no? Because
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it's literally the same thing.
Yeah,
I know
I'm
that
in
they,
it.
They made those.
You are?
I
How is
am
that?
in it.
Have you guys
I didn't know that
been
they
doing
made those,
anything?
those statements.
We have skits prepared because we're having our first presentation December
see this.
19th. You don't actually.
I really want
Because it's like, I'm literally like I'm literally talking like in a skit, and then I'm like, well, I really want to kiss this guy, but I don't know what to do. That's literally what it is.
But interestingly, now I have questions because this is me. This is me getting. So based on what you said, like I thought Teen Pep was to teach the facts about the facts and not put implications on those things, like you know, having an unwanted pregnancy would mess up a relationship. Like I didn't think it went into.
No, I don't
that.
think it goes. It's more like consent, talking about consent.
Okay. That's
Talking
definitely a
about
good thing.
abstinence. Yeah, abstinence is a big part of it. Like ways of protection. It's more of that, but it's just through the form of like skits and like kind of like
To make
teenagers
people
and
more
how they
comfortable.
feel.
Obviously,
Yeah,
it might
To
have
make it less
changed.
taboo, I guess. Maybe.
Yeah,
Okay.
to make it more
honestly,
funny,
I thought
too.
that was the whole point
Now,
of
is
Team
that
Pep.
available to everybody, or is it just?
I think it's for freshmen.
Freshman
Yeah, only
only.
freshmen.
Freshmen.
Yeah,
but-
the seniors teach it to the freshmen. But I thought the whole point of Team Pep was to basically just give like the facts, but not be so overwhelmed by like a very old like adult just doing it instead of someone closer to your age. That way you're maybe more comfortable or
I
something.
feel like infantilizing it kind of makes it like less valuable. Like you said yourself, the skits like Condom Man, so I feel like that just kind of
We
that
haven't
kinda
gotten
makes
to
the
that
issue
one yet,
worse.
though.
okay, I thought the condom.
That was
okay,
more like freshmen.
Yeah.
I remember
The
that.
thing is, I thought Team. Okay, I never went to be honest. But
I could tell.
I thought it was like you guys do have the facts, but you guys also threw some comedy in there. But the way you're describing it is like how he just said it. It's like a lot of like comedies.
I wish I
Make fun
had
of
the
actual
script, which is
facts.
in my
Yeah,
bag
but
with me.
obviously that
So-
was Team Pep 4 years ago. I'm not gonna like, dog on you Team Pep
Yeah.
people because that
No,
was
because here's the thing about Team Pep, because it's more of a class, and in the class we actually have like serious conversations. It's not like we're doing skits all the time. It's more like learning about like opinions. It's actually the most open class I've ever had, like where you actually can say whatever you think, and we talk through it very civilizedly. And about any topic, like it's not like they're restricting you from talking about anything. You talk about anything that you feel comfortable talking about. I think the skits are they're making it more like, trying to make it more entertaining since it is for freshmen, and like freshmen these days are gonna be like, that's so corny, like
Yeah.
talking about this is so
Even freshmen back
awkward,
then,
and
just
it's more like if it's gonna be corny, then if we're gonna be informing, it might as well be like something that's gonna grab your attention.
Yeah, it definitely did grab my attention. You did do that right. Like I will admit, it was a good time.
I have a question for you guys that I was just thinking about. I know it's off the topic of this, and I'm not trying to steer us away from the sex conversation. I'm totally cool with it. But just kind of coming in, and I'm curious too, going back into like sexism or how it manifests in a school or school community. How do you perceive your, and this, it's twofold. Do you perceive your male teachers and your female teachers differently? And if so, what way? And then also I wanted to then maybe just get your feedback on like how you as students perceive male administrators versus female administrators. And whether that comes into play at all, if we've ever thought about that or been conscious of that in any way.
Honestly, like for me, I don't think I have, because in my mind, I separate it not by male, female, the good and the bad teachers. It's like that. Like for example, Mr. Kleckner, I love him with all my heart.
Okay,
He's a
don't-
good teacher. He's scoring the good teacher. But
I got
like,
nervous he was gonna start saying.
Don't call people
but
out.
like a bad teacher that will not be named would just be like, there could be
Because
a
then I'll
female,
be blamed.
yeah, be a female bad teacher and a male bad teacher. They're in the same group for me. Like generally, and like obviously, what constitutes a good teacher could be like how open they are to talk about these types of things, have conversations. So,
You're a good teacher.
and it generally might be that female teachers are more willing to do that type of stuff. So generally, when it comes to my good teachers list, there are more female teachers than male teachers.
Interesting.
I think I kind of bounce off that more because at AUO, 60% of the faculty is female. And I think it's interesting because me personally, I don't perceive male and female teachers differently. It's just as Joshua said, it's the good and the bad. The people that are willing to service the students, go after school to help them, and there's those that don't. But I do see where you're coming from because I know a lot of kids at the school that when they see a female teacher, like sometimes they'll joke around like, oh, she's hot, like, she's attractive. You never see them doing that to a male teacher.
Yeah.
It's a one-way street for that. You never really hear students saying like, oh, look at that teacher, mister, he's so like attractive.
It's definitely very.
Because it just sounds.
Yeah,
I
it really, I understand
Now
what
that
you're
I'm
saying.
saying it right now, it sounds out of place, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't sound natural. But when you hear a guy talking about a teacher like how she's hot, you might hear
Yeah.
that every day.
I agree to a certain extent. Maybe it's just who I hang around with. But
He said pick your friends.
I mean, I'm
He's gone
pretty
now.
sure guys do it more. But I have heard of girls doing the same thing to guys.
Really?
I've heard.
Yes.
Yeah, it really does depend on who you hang out with, though.
It might just be who I hang out with, but what you said, they both do it.
Really? I don't,
Maybe not equally. Who
yeah,
knows?
definitely.
But
And it's
girls
funny, when I asked the
definitely do talk
question, I
about
was
that.
not even thinking about physical attractiveness whatsoever, but that's
It
interesting,
just
right?
led to
That comes
I agree with you, though.
that comes into play. I wasn't even thinking about that, but that, that I think that is something that's interesting.
I feel like, yeah, there is like a good and bad teacher. That's how you put it. But for me, for who I build like more like closer relationships with, is usually the girl teachers, just because of the fact that I can talk to them, and I feel more confident talking to them about so many more things than I do with the guy teachers. I don't know.
No,
It's
I
just-
definitely agree. I completely forgot what I was gonna say because I was gonna add after Joshua until Gustavo talked. But I do personally feel like most of the time I do get closer to the guy teachers just because of what you said. Like you kind of have more to talk about.
Yeah, and it's like your own
Definitely,
like for example, when I talk to you about things like this, it's kind of like, oh my God, somebody who's experienced it, right? And it's you might experience it, but in a different way.
Exactly. So, and the same thing I can be said, like something that I might experience that woman might not experience as much. I be able to talk about it with a guy teacher perfectly, like without me having to worry about it being completely different or anything. So it's honestly just how you said.
Yeah.
I do agree with Joshua though that most of the time I separate teachers whether they're good or bad. That's most of the time. That is how I see it. Like
Definitely.
nothing more. Like if you're a good teacher, you're a good teacher. If you're a bad teacher, you're a bad
I was just
teacher.
wondering if you felt maybe I could reword it to like when you walk into the room and you see a male teacher, like is there more like maybe that has to go with like trust, right? Maybe kind of perception, and then that can change over time, right? We're not who we are the first day, but when you walk in, you maybe see a male, maybe you feel more comfortable. And that might affect your behavior and your first impression, right? Because you might be more yourself or more open with a male teacher on the first day than you would be with a female teacher. And then that could,
It's definitely a different vibe.
yeah. So that's where I was just kind of going. And then I was thinking with that kind of question with administrators too. If that,
It is about personal preference. I don't really think there's an objective scale for like men do this better, women do this better, because in the education setting, it's just about who is more motivated to do what it takes for their students. Who cares more?
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with administration. You could say that a male principal could be better than a female principal, but it depends on the person, their experience, what they're willing to do, and et cetera. So.
Yeah, I kind of see like with teachers, like maybe it's because you don't really get as close to the administrators, but with teachers, I feel like administrators, I can't really tell. I honestly can't. Like I just kind of be forgetting about them sometimes.
Yeah, I forget that we're
Yeah, I
run by
love
like
them all.
anybody
They're
other than
administrators.
teachers.
going back to power
love
dynamics,
them.
interesting.
Huh?
Yeah,
You
so
love
and it's
them
so
all?
funny because we
I
obviously
love
have
them.
so much more
Oh, I thought you love them all.
I guess
Like,
face
You are
to face
crazy.
time with administrators that I would think that you'd have maybe a perception of them, but maybe you don't, right? Like they
Oh,
don't
yeah.
affect your everyday.
Exactly.
yeah,
every
except when
day.
they're going around yelling at us. Then
Is
that's
that
when
a
I'm
Right,
like,
and so if
oh.
a female administrator comes yelling at you, would you perceive that differently or react to that differently than a male administrator, do you think?
Administrators, I feel like I see them the same. Just,
I
just
honestly
because
do.
you don't know
Yeah.
them like that.
Like how you said that goes into power dynamics. That's a whole nother
Exactly.
conversation.
They're just
That
like,
is true.
that's
feel
the
like-
principle, that's
Well,
the
I
vice
said
principal.
power dynamics are part of the conversation side
Yeah.
a little bit,
Yeah, I
because
feel like
I
if
mean,
I'm
there's a whole
getting
power
yelled at, it's
dynamics
because
here.
either I did something wrong or they're just being annoying. That's the only way to perceive it. It's not like, oh, you know, it's a girl doing it to me. Like, no, that's not how it is. I think it's just me personally because coming from charter, it's a very close-knit community, and I've had more negative experiences with female teachers and administrators than male teachers and administrators. And you could say it's a coincidence, but I think it's about the people, and I think that really matters. You can disagree with me because you guys go to Pierre Fanboy High. I think it's objectively different for you guys, but
Better.
yeah.
Wow.
But yeah.
Now we're getting a whole nother dynamic.
But yeah, just because
deny it.
of my experience, I'm not gonna say
can't deny
that men are better than women at like being a teacher or being a principal because it's just my experience. It's just what I've seen, and it's very like closed. So, yeah.
Yeah, that sure does make sense.
Now, I feel like we should, Gustavo, you were, oh my God. I know you were researching about how men are being disserviced in the education system, and I don't know, I think it's important to see how maybe the different side of the coin, if you will, like how men are affected.
Oh,
because-
definitely. I think that's interesting because you look back to the history of our nation, right? Like to the founding, like the people that led the colonies to like victory against Britain. It was men. Like the people that worked in factories, the people that like grew crops. It was all men. These people, they led the economy and the nation. And when you think about it now, just think about the sentence that like men are oppressed in the education system. It sounds kind of dumb and out of place, but if you look at the numbers, like the kids that drop out of school, the kids that are failing their classes, the kids that have ADHD, ADD, or special like mental illness that they need accommodations for, men top that list. Men and boys, they're the ones that are commonly failing, dropping out of school. On average, every year, 3 million more women attend college than men. And women, they're more likely to be in advanced classes. They're more likely to take the SAT and get better scores. And I just feel like it's interesting because you could group it together and say that, oh, you know, kids with special accommodations and needs, those are the people that aren't getting service. But when you look at the numbers, it's mostly men. And I think that's interesting. That's something we're not addressing because, yes, it's not fair that when we talk about women and girls in the education system, they are being disserviced too. It's not fair that they're getting dress coded for something that a man could wear. They're being treated differently with bias. But you look at the numbers, and men were also lagging behind too. So it's a weird stigma. How are we doing a disservice and being biased against both genders, but yet society has two different perceptions of the issue.
I generally think that it's probably just a societal like norm that, you know, women are smarter, you know, they'll go to college, they'll do this, and like
They mature
what,
faster.
yeah, what you were saying before is like their only option is university. Men, they can go into labor and stuff, and
Mhm.
I feel like, yeah, so because of that, like, it's like the societal norm for women to perform better, I feel like. And I feel like because of that, men aren't maybe expected or pushed to, you know, go ahead and like be good students.
I was just going to add, like, again, I know, and this, you can't talk about sexism without talking about power structures and power dynamics, right? And you think about pendulum swinging, right? Sometimes in order to correct mistakes of the past, the pendulum sometimes has to swing a little far. And not to say that men are the rightful victims over that and things of that nature, but I think women, maybe females of the past few decades have, you know, it wasn't until less than 50 years ago that you had women attending Ivy League schools, you know? So it's very recent history where women now are getting access to education that they never had before. And maybe there's that expectation, right? So like grab it, you know, grab this by the reins and take it for all that you can, because this is something that you prior were restricted from, right? So not to say, because I agree with you, I think women, I will also say I think a lot of times women do have mental health issues that actually don't get diagnosed until much later in life, because women are taught to kind of just grin and bear it and take it all and pile more and more responsibilities on until eventually they're like, wait, maybe I did have ADHD when I was in high school, but it manifested differently. Sometimes these things manifest differently in women versus men. So I think what you're saying is completely valid too, but I think there's also, you know, like Josh saying, maybe there's just that societal shift right now, and the idea is hopefully, you know, that it would even out over time, because this is a new phenomenon that women are getting access to education, especially higher levels of education that they never had before, you know. So just kind of the other side of it, you know. I don't have the answers, but I'm just.
I mean, because obviously I've had personal experiences in a lot of these programs, which are meant for, I guess, like students who are above and beyond, like Ms. Renan, in the NHS, would you think there's a gender disparity? What do you think?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I would actually, again, I should have pulled that up. I don't think it's a huge disparity, but I definitely know that there's more women in National Honor Society, but that's also as more women applied.
True, and that's the same thing. Like,
And I've even said to you too, on the leadership boards of a lot of these National Honor Society, STUCO, all of those things, I tend to see more women on the leadership or in leadership positions than males too, and that is an interesting thing to think about. Why that is? Is it because less are wanting to apply, or is there some sort of kind of forces that are keeping them from applying?
I mean, as
So I don't think anybody would say that more women are smarter than men.
definitely, and as you know, I was also part of student council, and I was the only guy in the council. And I was in another program, which is Heroes and Cool Kids, which is about, like, it's more related to education and being like a student athlete. I'm like one of maybe like 5, 6 guys. It's very dominated by women, and I noticed that a lot of these programs, men aren't really being pushed to join. Like, I know in Heroes and Cool Kids, Miss Rothstein was literally like hunting for men to find because they don't apply. Like,
That was the same thing for Team Pep also.
yeah, like
And
they
I was
don't
doing
apply
it
to
for
these
National
things.
Honor Society board too. I was like, I need more male, like, you know, I wanted to be more evenly, you know,
Yeah.
balanced.
Even in a lot of my classes, I'm like, but I'm just noticing now that I'm thinking about it. Like a lot of the classmates are females.
AP classes are
Definitely
AP
very
classes.
female
And
dominated.
even honors too.
There's
All of
more
that.
women taking advanced classes than men. That is kind of
Yeah,
a
I
thing
think-
I've noticed.
Both English classes this year and last year, I don't think I've had more than like 4 boys. And the rest would be like girls, and it would be like a class of 20.
Oh yeah, in my
Yeah, your
AP
English
Lang
has, like 10
class,
people.
my AP Lang class, I'm one of 3 guys.
Yeah.
Who's the third guy?
Samuel, and then
Oh, yeah, I
Brian, and
remember
then
that.
me.
So why do you think that is? Is that something that starts at a young age? That because we know, I mean, we don't have the data, but I highly doubt that the women are just, you know, you can't say innately more intelligent.
Yeah.
But obviously, to get to these classes, there's like a recommendation piece, right? There's certain things that, you know, you don't just hop into an AP class. So what happens along the way that male students are either not recommended or don't want to take the classes, or what's happening, you think, when it comes to enrollment?
I feel like personally that it could be an extension of the patriarchy, and I know it's like a word we haven't used yet, but I personally believe patriarchy is very real. It affects both men and women in very many negative ways, and I feel like this is an example where it's generally known as like the men have to be like, you know, the providers, they have to be doing the work, they shouldn't, I don't know, like going into smart stuff might be a waste of their time, or going into like smarter classes might be like just not something they should be interested in. But, and like them having to fight that societal pressure as well, and like their parents, and then like all the teachers, like they're all, because like the patriarchy is very subconscious, like you don't think about it at all, basically. And like it kind of extends to all the people who would be recommending them, to the people who should be pushing them to get these better grades. And I feel like in the end of the day it affects them, and it makes less of them want to apply or get pushed to apply. There are probably many students that were very capable in class, they're very smart, but since they never got pushed to actually try, they never went to those higher classes.
And to push back a little bit, when I think patriarchy, I kind of think the other way. I think, you know, you're thinking of like, almost like, we're thinking that of like a stereotype of what it is to be male, right? But the patriarchy to me represents kind of what you were talking about, right? Systems put into place centuries ago by men, right? Men as leaders, men as the deciders, men as the leaders. Like the, you know, look at the CE. I know it's evening out a little bit, but if you look at the, you know, the billionaires and the trillionaires and the millionaires and the CEOs, they're still, it's heavily dominated by males. And they didn't just get there like that. They a lot of them had to get advanced degrees, or there might have been nepotism, and there might have been people who pushed them along the way. And so maybe, you know, there has been, like, again, I go back to maybe this shift where women are kind of saying, we're going to take this back now. And that has kind of, in some ways, maybe pushed in these newer generations, males to not be scared, but like you said, to kind of almost shrink back a bit. You know, rather than saying like, I'm gonna do what I want to do, now I feel overwhelmed a bit by the females, right? The females are overly going for it, and in a way maybe without like subconsciously, there maybe, I'm trying to think, I mean, some of you are in psychology, maybe they're shrinking back from their potential because of that push. I don't know.
Your nepotism take was actually pretty interesting because this is different, but it might be a little off topic, but a lot of the top universities, one of the main things they look for when you apply is whether or not you have family members that went to said university.
Legacy questions.
Yeah, like those are a very big like number of actual like just acceptance rates, basically.
Especially with the Ivy Leagues, and that's going to be, obviously that's going to favor white males, right? Then, you know, now we're bringing race into it, but when we think about the patriarchy of the United States, right, you're going to think, who are the legacies? And I think now, obviously, with affirmative action and other things of that nature, that's it's been turned a little bit on its head, but I think it still comes into play, right, when it comes to those top universities.
Yeah, I feel like the issue is definitely rooted in the history of our nation. Because if you want to address the issue of sexism as a whole, you can just go back to like how our nation started. Like men, you know, they're masculine. These are the soldiers, the providers. These are people that went to work in the factories. Why do they have to pursue a college education when they can just get a job at 16 and just provide for their family? You know, women, they're feminine. You know, they really. I think I remember it was during the Enlightenment where we started to become more individualistic. We started talking about freedom and liberty. And then following that, we had a period of romanticism. People started to think with their emotions, their intuitions. And coincidentally, the period of romanticism was when women started to become more dominant in society. They started to take more active roles. They were volunteering. They were becoming religiously active. And I feel like because of that, we correlate intuition, feelings, you know, being feminine with women. You know, this is why that they could want to pursue a college education because, you know, they're stuck at home taking care of like the family. It's just the basic norms and stigmas and stereotypes that we have from the past.
That's the danger of a single story, right?
Exactly.
I know you guys are like,
Oh my goodness.
danger of a single story, everybody.
Y'all just all agreed to show us all that video.
You loved it. Well, it applies, right? This idea of the
Yeah.
stereotypes, right? The
Yeah.
norms that are placed upon us, you know, gender norms, racial norms, you know, even cultural norms. Where do they come from?
And also what you were saying about now, I feel like in this time period, it's very much more like promoted for women to be independent. And it's like, yeah, 'cause get your bag, you know? And it's like, you do this by like going to school, like starting your own business. A lot of businesses like promote, they're like women owned and, you know.
Entrepreneurship, yeah.
Exactly. And I feel like that's why maybe there's such a, like for me personally, like that kind of inspires me when I see that. So that pushes me to wanna like do better in school. Just that idea that like I can prove to my dad that I can be independent. And maybe that's what a
And
lot of
overcoming like a lot of stereotypes, right? Like or
Yeah.
maybe things that your family, like I know for me, my mom, you know, was a single mom. She barely graduated high school. I was the first one to graduate college. And like because of that, I was like, you know, we all have these individual experiences that shape us. I was like, I'm gonna do this, right? But sometimes we don't have that, or we have people telling us the opposite. And I think there is a piece of that. It comes down to like who you are, where you come from, nature versus nurture. But I think where we fit within, I think the societal like systems, right? Those things put in place, like the patriarchy and what comes with that is important to look at and how that manifests.
And I kind of want to go into one of the many ways that people have tried to combat the patriarchy in the form of single-sex schools, which is what Francis focused on.
So this topic was really weird for me because I'm not really at all experienced in single-sex schools. I'm sure like many of you guys have experienced single-sex schools.
Nope.
But I did find some articles, all of them which sort of support the idea of single-sex schools and that, you know, the better proficiency scores within students, there's a like stronger camaraderie, of like stronger community. So I just wanted your guys' thoughts on that.
Now, for the record, we did speak about single-sex schools in our last episode, but we are
Briefly.
going more in depth about it. So, sorry, continue.
Wait, because have you guys seen the video where it's like this school, this all-male school in, I don't remember where it was, but it's not, I don't think it was in America, where all the males would like, it was like this tradition where they would go to the window and they would catcall or like yell, like yell some,
Oh.
I remember that actually.
yell like mean stuff to girls, to the girls passing by. And when I saw that, I was like,
That's
no way.
wild.
Yeah, that was in Spain. I
No.
don't remember exactly where, but it was
Well, I
in
think
Spain.
that's an
Yeah.
element. I mean, that's okay. So I don't have single-sex schools on my side here in my experience, but I was in a sorority in college, and fraternity, sorority. You know, it's anytime you get kind of almost a mob mentality. So things I think like hazing. You can talk about that, those examples, but. You know, I was thinking about this in terms of my husband. He actually went to high school, and he went to St. Joe's in Metuchen, which is nearby. And he grew up in Cranford, which has some of the best, you know, ranked public schools in New Jersey. So I've always been, like, my biggest thing is, like, I'm like, why would your parents pay to send you to an all-boys school when you could have just, you know, you were already in a public school that was ranked highly? And they kind of were of that, like, that idea that he would be more focused if he only had boys around him, that he would perform better in his classes because I guess girls were a distraction, or you know, that he you know would have that experience. And I think it's a little bit outdated, but that's essentially why he was sent. And he actually he vehemently denied, I don't want to go. He failed the entrance exam on purpose. And then they made him, they're like, we know you're not this stupid. So they made him take it again. Like, you failed at failing. And then he ended up going, and, you know, it ended up working out for him, but, you know, he still kind of wistfully thinks about what it would have been like if he had went to what he calls a, like, normal high school. I don't know if the end would have been the same result, but that was their mentality, was to send the kids to a single-sex private school where they could, like, focus.
I feel like that's definitely interesting, because I think it's still weird that someone his age, like 18, going to college, why are we still infantilizing the idea of being surrounded by women? Like, oh, it's going to be a distraction. You're not going to focus on your studies. Why are we dumbing it down for them?
That was college?
Yeah,
Well,
these are
I mean,
young
it was high
adults.
school, but at the end, essentially, he was graduating. Yeah.
That all goes down to, like, what do you think is more important? I personally believe, like, having an actual social life and having experience talking to other people, especially the other gender, is more important than purely studies, for the simple reason that studies is only going to be a certain part of your life. Once you're an actual adult, the more important part is going to be, like, how you actually socialize with people and how you connect with other people. And if you go to a single-sex school,
you'll still have that to a certain extent, but it's not going to be the same.
Right, or it like limits, right? Because you
Exactly.
said
You'll be
it's going to
very
limit
limited.
what you talk about or what you hear, and it's going to limit the perspectives. You're definitely not going to hear about the menstrual cycle, that's for sure. You know, if you were in an all-boys high school, unless maybe something snarky was said about it, it wouldn't be something most likely that would be from a female perspective. So I think it's, I know. It's
That
like
too, and that also goes back to the misinformation part. You're not gonna actually know a lot of like actual information about the other gender, because the only facts you'll know about the other gender is either from your family, which sent you to an old boys school, or yeah, I mean, yeah, or from the other guys themselves who have zero experience with it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
And let's say that they do implement, like, let's say we're in an all-boys school, and in their health classes they implement like education on like the menstrual cycle and all that. There's no woman in the room when they're learning about it to like say anything, whether it's right or wrong.
Right.
They can't infer their like experience on it, so it's kind of it's weird.
And if you have a female teacher teaching, I mean, it gets a little. So I highly doubt it's something that's discussed at all, because I can imagine
Yeah.
that would be very awkward to be.
Yeah, why
You
are we
know.
learning about this?
Yeah, and then
Definitely.
it's like, well, we're learning about it. It's important, but again, it's like this weird kind of imbalance. So
Yeah, I mean, sorry, I just blanked out.
No, but it's the same thing I said. I want to go back to my point where basically I do believe social is more important, but there are statistics that say that like single gender schools, in pure numbers, they are better. In pure numbers. Obviously, it's how I said, I still believe like having experience with the other gender is more important, but going by the pure test scores and pure numbers, single-sex schools are better.
I mean, that's kind of a given.
Yeah.
Single-sex schools are a private school. They have more access to like tutoring resources, the academic privilege.
That's
they usually
also
are
another
smaller
thing.
communities as well, which is why
Exactly.
people go to charter schools
I
as
mean-
well, right? But like
In
there's
theory.
certain
In
theory,
They aren't
in
doing too
theory,
hot on the
in
test
theory.
scores.
In theory.
Right, but
Wow.
yeah, but the idea, right, especially the single-sex schools are going to be private schools, and they're obviously, I think that plays. So it's not solely a sex or a gender thing, because you're gonna. I think primarily, we haven't got into this, but LGBTQI plus issues are a huge issue when I think comes to even single-sex schools, because I can't even
definitely.
imagine how they're, how that would be dealt with.
Oh, it would definitely
even.
be more harsh. in a
It would be
single-sex
very
school.
harsh because it defeats the whole purpose of a single
I mean, is it
gender
something that
school.
could even, right, I don't know how that would, I mean, I'm not
Oh my
opening up.
God, you're right.
What would you do if you have a student who, or, a young adult who's coming to terms with their identity and they're now in this?
Surrounded by just the
I feel
same
like the basic
people.
protocol is just to expel them, which is not really fair.
It's
Right,
not
which is
fair at all.
punitive and harmful, I mean,
Yeah,
and all the
that's
things
cool.
that
Straight
you
up
could-
discrimination.
Right, so I don't, I mean, not to throw, but when I think about sexism, I can't help, because we are in, a state of being and understanding that sex is different than gender, and gender identity, is on a spectrum, and how that all fits into this. I'm not trying to complicate things, but is definitely part of this conversation in some way, too.
No, that's my mom because it's getting late.
Oh my God, we have the same title for our moms, and my mom was calling me like literally. I was like texting her. I was like,
Well, I think to finish this off, we have some questions to ask. I mean, we were supposed to be a little more in depth, so we can do a sort of lightning round for these questions.
okay.
So the first one that I'm going to pick are, do you think the American education system, as of now, cultivates or denounces sexism?
I don't feel like I can. Yeah, because you're like the most
No,
informed.
mine, want to hear from you.
I feel like I can't speak for the whole American system because
I'm asking for your
But
opinion.
personally,
I know, but like I'm just saying like
She's
my
putting out a
my experience
disclaimer.
is very narrow. Yeah, I'm putting out a disclaimer. I feel like in this school specifically, I don't feel like they're like I feel like it's fine. Like I don't feel like it's too bad of a problem, at least from my eyes or like from my experience. It's not as bad as some places, because I've heard of some places where it's like this has happened to me and
yeah.
it sucks. You know?
Panther Pride.
But do you
Right,
think
like-
do you think we actively denounce it though as a school system?
Well, I mean, I mean, I don't know what you mean by actively denounce it, because I don't think there's anything out there. I mean, there's mission statements, vision statements. You could look all of those things up. But I think that whether we've done in the past or we're trying to do better in the present or the future, I mean, there are initiatives that either teachers on a micro level are putting out there to be, anti-hate and anti-discrimination. I know I make that a big focus of my curriculum, but then overall as a district there is, and like I said, maybe we need to get better, and I'm on this committee for the school, about being more visible, and I think we're trying to do that. There is a diversity, equity and inclusion committee that is, working on these initiatives, and that's maybe been a little bit too behind the scenes, and maybe this is, the fact that you're talking about this and don't know about it is something that I'm going to bring to the table and say that we need to be more visible. We need to be out there, right? Sexism would be a part of that initiative. Not the only part, but definitely part of that initiative. So I think there are efforts, but maybe you are bringing to light that particularly here, they need to be more visible.
Definitely.
Just
these
out there.
committees and programs, I didn't even know they existed until you started talking about them.
That's why you brought me in.
Yeah. Well, so next question. My computer just died. I have to
All
look
our
at
computers
parentheses.
All
just died.
Yeah. So
I mean, they're all up and
what
running.
is your response to people who say sexism isn't prevalent in the school?
I would say just because
You are
it
one of those
doesn't.
people, just-
I think,
She's responding to herself.
no, listen. I would say that just because it hasn't happened to you doesn't mean it doesn't happen. Because for me, it's like, for example, I haven't had like any huge issues with it where I feel like, I have to like argue with it. But I know that there's other people with different experiences who probably could give you a whole list of bad experiences they've had. So like, just because it doesn't happen to you doesn't mean it doesn't happen.
I totally agree with that. I think that's one of like the biggest parts of understanding or trying to come in from a place of understanding is knowing that your experience doesn't represent everyone else's experiences, right? And having panels like this and having open dialogue is important to making sure that, sexism in particular, but diversity, equity, and inclusion issues are being addressed.
Our final question will be, how should we address sexism in schools? What steps do you think we can take to remedy the issue further?
Whoa, that's deep.
That's amazing.
I like the wording.
Is it weird to say education in a school?
I mean,
Or are we at that point of the night where, I think it's, right, having conversations like this, I think is, the fact that you had these questions, and we're like, whoa, deep, and our heads are, it's late, but having these conversations that's how you get, right, to, I don't think we're ever gonna get to a state of perfection, right,
Yeah.
but the path is there, and having, the fact that we can sit here, I know I'm your teacher, or I was your teacher, and we have males, we have females in the room, and be able to have frank discussions about some really tough things, and I think we all don't feel like we wanna crawl under the table and die, right? I feel pretty comfortable. I think you guys were able to talk about things that we're not talking about every day, and I think the more we can do that, I think can hopefully get us to a place of equity, across all levels.
Just how you said, we're never going to be perfect, but the whole goal is to try to get as close as possible to that perfection.
Definitely. The more you talk about the issue, the more stigma you take out of it. I feel like that's the best way to look at it.
Exactly, and just how you said, the most important way we can help the situation is education.
To talk about
to contemplate the education. We are saving the American education system.
Is this
Right here,
I
right
set that
now.
up
This better be
Yes.
I
broadcasted
set that
all
up
over
perfectly.
America.
So this should just wrap up the end of it. So yeah, that was our episode on sexism in the American education system with our two great experts and obviously our four amazing
Experts.
hosts.
Experts, we'll take that.
I feel like such an
So
expert.
thank you guys for sitting through this podcast and peace out.
Have a good
Bye,
one.
everyone.
Broadcast this to the whole world.